Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is AWS On Air Startup, where every single Tuesday we come at you live, giving you advice on how it is that you can build your startup in AWS. My name is Jillian Ford, and I'm a startup solutions architect here at AWS. And I'm going to be with you every single week, bringing you experts across startups, across different technical domains, who are going to share their advice on a specific topic related to building your startup in AWS. Let's do some intros here, and then we're going to kick off with our icebreaker because I'm starting to see the chat coming in. Lazy Coder 3, I've been seeing you so much on the live stream. Love it. Because hi, yes, place hi where you're coming in from. But we'll do some intros right now. So Harshita.
Hello, everyone. I am Harshita. I am the Senior Product Manager on AWS Amplify. I'm primarily focused on the Swift and Android libraries. Super excited to discuss things with you guys today.
Awesome. JC.
Hi, everybody. My name is JC Jimenez. I'm a senior software engineer working on the Amplify library for Swift. So if you're hoping to make a Mac application or iOS application, this would be the Amplify library to use.
And Sam.
Yeah, hey everyone, great to be here. My name is Sam Farber. I'm a startup solutions architect working with fintech startups.
Awesome. And so today's topic is going to be about how to build a mobile app MVP on AWS. And before we get in there, the reason why we do this as a live show instead of just a basic webinar is because we want to hear your questions. And I'm starting to see from the live stream, we've got people from all over the world. Abhishek from India, Graciel from Brazil, Sam from Nigeria. We've got Navti from Cameroon. I wish I could pronounce your name from Turkey, but I love Turkey. Oh, Goose Khan. Krakow, Poland. Tell us where you're from. We've got someone from space, which great. I wish I could be live streaming this from space someday. I think we'll have a startup who's going to take us into space, and that's where will be the next one where we do these live. But yes, because we do this live, we want to hear your questions. I'm going to be looking at the chat and asking questions from this amazing panel. But we're going to start with an icebreaker because just as a warm up your fingers on the keyboard. So tell us, and this is ironic because JC's got the music going on. So tell us in the chat, what is your favorite music artist from the 90s? Favorite music artist from the 90s. Harshita, what is yours?
I think I would say I listened to a lot of Backstreet Boys during that time.
Oh my God, yes. NSYNC. I was
basic. I'm gonna pick that.
Yes. JC, what about you?
I would have to say Soundgarden. Soundgarden was my jam when I was in high school. Sorry, this is I don't know if
Soundgarden.
I'm my jam.
Okay. I was expecting something more like rock and roll, like heavy metal with the guitars things that you got going on. But Soundgarden, okay. Rage Against the Machine on the chat. Tupac, yes, love it. We've got some Westlife, Michael Jackson. Sam, what about you?
I gotta go with. I used to love the Beastie Boys. I still love the Beastie Boys. Some great songs.
Yes.
Yeah, I gotta hear some Soundgarden then, because based on those, your setup back there, I trust your taste in music, JC. So I gotta try some of those.
Yeah, 2 votes for Nirvana. Love it. I would say for me, yeah, I'm gonna go NSYNC. I was a huge fan of all of the boy band craze. I was definitely on that bandwagon. But we've got a lot of boy band fans. Westlife. Oh, okay. I like it. REM. Yes. Thank you for all of your, I guess, different participating in today's icebreaker. So let's go ahead and get on to today's topic. And of course, any different questions that you have related to this topic of building an MVP mobile app on AWS, we're going to cover those different questions today. So let's get started with really an MVP and what is the best way to build that. So for those of you maybe who aren't familiar with the term MVP, it stands for minimum viable product. And it's really the process of how is it that you're able to get an app to market as quickly as possible, get feedback from your customers, and be able to incorporate that really quickly so you're building features that your customers actually need. So Sam, you work with a ton of different startups. When someone comes to you saying, hey, how can I build a mobile app really quickly within AWS, whatever the industry is, what advice do you give them?
Yeah, and a lot of times when it comes to speed and time to market, it can be you have a lot of options, of course, when developing mobile apps. So some things that I recommend to keep in mind is if speed is important, using those cross-native types of application platforms rather than native, just developing for iOS or just developing for Android, because those can take significant amount of resources, significant amount of time. Whereas, cross-platform frameworks can be, a lot easier and a lot faster to develop. There are other drawbacks to that, of course. So there's some pros and cons that we can get into, but that's one area. And Amplify is. We'll talk about that as well on AWS Amplify. A great way of being able to quickly get those ideas from your head to the mobile app pretty quickly.
Harshita, so you work on Amplify. When someone asks you what is Amplify, how would you describe it to them?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I would say when someone asks me that question, it's Amplify is your best friend when you want to definitely build an MVP. So if you want to build an app that you want to release an MVP for your users, you want to use some sort of cloud connected solution that helps you get to market as soon as possible. And you do not want to waste a lot of time reinventing the wheel and implementing your own authentication and data management flows. So at that time, you would use a solution like AWS Amplify that provides all these solutions out of the box with minimal configuration possible on the platform of your choice. So one of our principles is we want to meet the developer where they are and to help them best build a solution that fits their business needs. So I would say that's basically the tenet of Amplify in general.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I would say another thing I see that I like about Amplify is the abstraction of having to know the exact names of AWS services. As long as you can just being able to say, I need storage, I need a database, and really those best practices being really built in. And JC, I know later on you'll show us a demo, but it's as someone, and Sam probably relate to this, as some people who are as architects who understand what best practices are and seeing how much is abstracted from you on the networking side that Amplify takes care of, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and another side of that is, with Amplify and being able to quickly get your ideas to the as a mobile app. The one thing that is crucial is that CI/CD phase where you want to test out your code, you want to commit code and push that out quickly. I know Amplify, and we might see this later, where you can actually commit your code and automatically have that whole pipeline run, have the deployment, have the builds automatically set up. So it makes it really easy and really quick to, if you do need to test out something or push new code, it makes it much much more feasible.
And we've got a question on Amplify specifically from Oyen. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Oyen. So is Amplify a no-code or low-code technology?
That's a great question. I would say that Amplify is a low-code technology as of now. It is something that you still have control on how to build your app, while we provide you with the tools to build that app faster and easier so that you can focus on your business logic and not creating something that's already perfected for you in terms of table stake features that you want to have in your app. So yeah, I would say it's a low-code solution and not a no-code solution.
So with Amplify, and this actually, let's go back to the topic with MVP. And Harshita, I'll leave this one with you, and then JC will ask your perspective afterwards. So for these people who they are building an MVP of a mobile app, and usually with an MVP, you start with a small set of users to really be able to get their feedback on those features quickly. So as a product manager, how do you think about being able to push out a MVP quickly so that everyone on your team can be able to get feedback on what is it that their customers want?
Awesome. As a product manager, I really love this question, and I've been waiting to be asked this. So, so coming from a software engineering background myself, I always have this urge to like get my hands dirty and build something. So when I have an idea, I'm just like, I just need to get into coding as soon as possible. But the more I spend time as a product manager, I realized that that's actually a long way to do things. Like you think that it's easier to get started on an app, but that's not really the most efficient way. I would say that the most important thing to remember is to understand who you're building it for. So as you just said, you need to understand your market. Once you identify the problem that you're trying to solve and for who you're trying to solve it, then you can come up with a solution and a set of principles that will help solve the problem for your target set of users. And then you come up with a set of features that your app must have to successfully solve this problem for the user. A lot of people that I've spoken to misunderstand MVP as the minimum number of features, but MVP is essentially the feature set that will actually solve the problem end to end for your user. Otherwise, you're not really solving the problem if you're just going to release like very minimal set of features. So I think that's a good balance that you need to strike on what is the actual end state that your user is going to be happy. So if you're trying to build maybe a social media app to connect a certain set of users with each other, and you say that, hey, I just want to like create a login screen and help them create their profile and connect with each other. While that is a social media app, it's not really helping you build your niche on that app with your use case. Maybe it is providing other attributes that help users of a certain type identify each other, and that's the actual the feature the value add for your solution. So always take that extra step to make the difficult decision of adding those extra x number of features that actually differentiate your app, and that should be part of your MVP. So I think that's a very important lesson that I learned over the years.
Love that. JC, anything to add from your experience as an engineer?
Yeah, of course. So when I talk to people about Amplify, I actually compare things a little bit to, believe it or not, music. As a developer, and I'm sure a lot of developers who might be listening, one thing that I have found key in my success in implementing new projects or applications has always been like not losing that inspiration or that kind of mindset about what you're solving, right? What you're giving your user. At Amazon, we like to talk about working backwards and presenting a product that is usable by somebody and it solves the problem. And Amplify basically allows you to keep that focus without having to worry too much about all this infrastructure that's powering all your storage or your authentication. You don't have to think about like the permissions between connecting your authentication system with your S3 buckets or your data source or your database. You kind of just focus on solving the problem, and that's kind of how I see Amplify.
There were some questions that came in that I think would be great to clarify. So someone asked if Amplify is serverless, which it's not. It's more than just being a technology. It's really a framework of how you build applications, and one of them could be serverless applications. Have you? Is it right now? Is it really meant for serverless applications?
Yeah, I think that's again, I second what you said. It's not entirely what it is. It's again, the ethos of Amplify is to help developers build their apps faster. And if part of that solution is serverless, that is a solution that we'll provide via Amplify. But the main tenet is the fact that we want developers to not have to worry about messy cloud configurations and just achieve the end functionality without having to understand a particular service in depth to then use the individual APIs to build, let's say, a sign-in functionality. While you can just use a sign-in API from Amplify and have some configurations in there, and there you go, you have a sign-in functionality for your app, right? So I think that's the core essence of Amplify, rather than entirely serverless.
Yeah, I'd second that. And just one of the benefits, like Harshita was saying, is it's so tied in. Wouldn't say that it's serverless, but it's tied into so many different serverless technologies on AWS, right? Like, something like API Gateway or like an authentication service like Cognito. It makes it really easy to kind of tie those services in, again, for those quick kind of deployments.
Those are great explanations. Got another question here. How do you measure their performance? And I think maybe this might be someone who's maybe they're using Amplify, and so they're not sure maybe where in AWS they actually go into measure the performance of their application. So maybe you can clarify, is there anything native to Amplify, or do they go into looking at CloudWatch, maybe it's X-Ray or any other observability tool?
Yeah, you can totally integrate with existing AWS monitoring services to help check the performance of your app. And those are use cases that we want to actively hear from developers to then see how we can incorporate this as a inbuilt solution in Amplify. Because at the end of the day, we want to meet developers where they're at and build the most important features for them. So these are some probably exciting use cases that I'd like to hear more about as well.
And then one question that came in, I also want to clarify. So David, this is live, but the recording is going to go onto AWS's YouTube channel, the AWS Events YouTube channel. You'll be able to find the recording of this. So keep the questions coming. We're going to move on to the topic, and then I'll circle back into some of the questions as we're going through, because I just want to make sure we cover a lot of the things here that we've got related to MVPs and mobile apps. So Sam, I want to get your perspective on this. When startups come to you and they say, okay, we've got an MVP, we've already worked with some customers, we have an idea of the features that we want, but now we want to really focus on having a bigger launch and being able to scale. What are some of the technical architecture considerations that you think about when you're making recommendations to these types of startups?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's a great question. And I like to get kind of an overall larger picture view of what they're looking to build, what they're focusing on. And then, some of the kind of technical things that I'll ask about and see if they're, see if it's a good fit for is something like, as they're trying to scale, what kinds of underlying technologies should they use? Should they use, load balancers? Should they use, is this going to be an application that's going to be global, where they'll have global users and maybe they'll need a content delivery network, right? Where they can take advantage of set of servers that are, grouped together all around the world and have, those users all around the world be able to access those applications much quicker using that. And then a lot of times we want to get into kind of how to make sure that we make that application as efficient as possible, right? So if if we're talking about databases, maybe we're going to be, having to, how do we scale those databases, or how do we, make those, most efficient by maybe setting up caching, right? And so, a lot of it goes into, that first conversation of, what kinds of technologies do we want? How do we make sure that we can scale out quickly? And really kind of getting all those different requirements that they need, I think, is really important.
Nice. Okay, so you said databases, caching, sharding, and then you said there's also some testing maybe you would suggest them to do before, which kind of relates to the question earlier about the observability.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And exactly. And like Amplify and like we mentioned, some of those observability tools like CloudWatch. It's important to make sure that you do have those tests, right? So things like load testing, right, where you can actually make sure that you can, get a good idea of, how your application is performing under a sustained amount of load or user load, right? So then there's load testing, and then with that you can see what those response times are, how the CPU and memory usage is, any application performance bottlenecks, things like that. And then load testing, and then also there's scalability testing, right? So being able to make sure that your application can scale out and also right, if you're trying to save on costs. And then also, just general performance testing, right? Making sure that you have all of those kind of all that overall performance in mind. So that includes, both load and stress testing.
There were two questions in the chat that were related to the frameworks that Amplify supports. So Harshita, could you just get into that for some of the folks who are new to Amplify?
Yeah, of course. So Amplify primarily helps developers build front-end web and mobile applications. So if you dive in deeper in web, we have React support right now, especially with like UI components as well. So we support JavaScript, which you can then extend to the other frameworks. And in mobile, we have Swift and Android in the native category. So we support those platforms for native. And then we have Flutter and React Native for hybrid platforms. For hybrid development that target both Android and Swift platforms. So those are the current platforms we support in terms of mobile web and mobile development. So I hope that answers your question about the frameworks that we support within Amplify. And this is for libraries. Sorry.
Yeah, good one. One more question I'll get from the chat, and then we'll show the demo. So there were two questions that were related to the topic of, I think people misunderstand Amplify and think, okay, maybe it's great for when it's just 100 users, but when I have 1,000 or 500,000, will it be able to scale to those users? So maybe, let's say, Harshita, if you could kind of clarify really how Amplify actually works with respect to the other underlying AWS services that are really running the application.
Yeah, so Amplify is a library. So I keep kind of clarifying this because a lot of people think or call it an SDK, and Amplify is more than that, right? So we have a lot of logic in the Amplify libraries to make developers' lives easier. And you have ready integration with other AWS services. So with this level of abstraction, we are still using the service against their limits underneath. So we are also a consumer of the services that AWS has to offer. So the principle of Amplify is that once you start using Amplify, it'll grow with your need, and that is definitely dependent on the tiers of the tiers of usage that the services themselves provide. So it scales along with your user base. So, and beyond that, if you want more customizations, we offer more in-depth tooling that helps you configure your services accordingly, and escape patches that help you access the underlying SDK as well. So that's how we manage, or that's how Amplify is built on top of the services from AWS.
I love that explanation. And I think the demo will also help clarify some of the other questions that people have about Amplify. So JC, sorry, I called you Jay-Z. I think the music vibe, the music theme of today, it just felt appropriate. But
another great 90s artist.
JC, can you show us the demo?
Of course. Give me 1 second. Let me share my screen. And here we go. Please let me know you can see it. All right. So I'm going to show you just some basic setup. But before I do, I just want to sort of reference this documentation. So as Harshita mentioned, we have documentation for all the platforms that we support. This includes Swift, Android, Flutter, React Native, and JavaScript. In this case, I'm looking at the Swift library. Now, when you first set up Amplify, obviously you'll have to go through some prerequisites and like install things like Node, and most importantly is the Amplify CLI tool. And so what I'll show you now is basically me setting up Amplify on a brand new Xcode project for an iOS application. And so I'm going to scroll down through this documentation real quick just to sort of show you the documentation itself, and then also just to copy paste some stuff, and like at least point out where you will need to be copy pasting things. And so when you open up your Xcode project, you'll want to look for this Swift package manager library. On Android, for example, the equivalent would be something like a Maven Central artifact link or reference. In this case, you would copy this link, you would add it to your Xcode project, and then that would basically add the library reference to your project. Once you're there, you would then have to select which of the Amplify features that you want to use should be linked against what libraries or which features of Amplify your application or your library should be using, right? And so it'll let you select things like the API or analytics, for example, for measuring performance, as somebody asked earlier, Cognito for authentication, and then Xcode will show you a checkbox of which libraries to link. I'm not going to show you that right now because that takes a little while, because it's relatively large in terms of a dependency graph. Once it actually compiles into your application, it's not that big, but the first setup of your project might take a little bit. And so I'm going to skip over that piece. And so once you're there, you basically want to run Amplify init. So let's do that. I'm going to go into my command line. I have a project here. And as you can see at the base, let me make my text a little bit bigger. As you can see in my project, I'm basically in my terminal, I'm basically at the location where my Xcode project and my source live. And that's where you would run Amplify init. So you just run Amplify init. Amplify would then ask you what you want to call your project. I'm just going to call it Amplify demo. It'll ask you what environment you're on, which editor you like to use, for example, for editing JSON files, things like that, and what kind of app it is. And in this case, we are an iOS app. And Amplify, the CLI tool, automatically noticed that I had an Xcode project at this directory. And so it knows that we're working with an iOS app. And so I'm going to answer yes, I want to initialize a project. And it'll basically ask me what I want to use for my AWS credentials. If you've already set up your AWS CLI profile and things like that, you can choose one of these two options. In my case, I'm going to choose AWS profile. And I have one of the profiles, the one that I'm going to use, I'm just going to use my default profile. And so it takes a little bit for Amplify to sort of set up some resources based on what I told it. And then it's going to ask me what features of Amplify I want to use. And so in this case, I'm going to ask it to add authentication, which is basically necessary for uploading files that are basically associated to the user that is authenticated. And then I'll add the actual storage feature, the S3 storage feature. So I'm going to answer yes to this, and then it's going to finish setting things up for me. Now, right now, nothing has really happened other than creating these little files that you'll notice once that application or that CLI tool runs. So you'll see a JSON file that contains your configuration for the services that you will tell it that you want to use, and then some other AWS configuration data. There's also a directory that it'll create called Amplify, and this is basically where the configuration for your Amplify application or stack is located. So that's where Amplify will put its configuration files telling it, oh, the user wants to use authentication, they want to use geo, they want to use analytics. That's where it stores its things. But these two JSON files are basically the part that tell it which buckets we're going to use and things like that. So let's do that now. If you were to go back to the configuration, I'm sorry, to the documentation, let's just pick storage. If you go back here, you'll notice that for each of these features that you see on the left-hand side, you'll follow a similar pattern. Amplify, add, and then the feature. So in this case, we're going to add some storage capabilities to our application. This will let us upload files to S3, so AWS S3. And so I'm going to basically paste that over here, and it's going to ask me a couple of questions. It's going to ask me whether I want to upload images or NoSQL database, have a NoSQL database. And in this case, I'm just going to go with images and data and files. And then it's going to ask me if I want to set up Cognito, which is the authentication piece, right? If I were to answer no here, it would still allow me to upload things, but it would be kind of like this public-facing S3 bucket that, or somewhat less restrictive S3 bucket where you could upload things and anybody could potentially see them. But if you wanted to have files that are associated to a specific user, then you would want to say answer yes to this question, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I'm just going to go with all the defaults. You'll see me basically selecting some of these default configurations, and I will basically select the basics. I'll say yes, I'm done, and it's going to ask me what my S3 bucket should be. In this case, it generates a random bucket name. I'm going to go with that for the sake of the demo, but if you want to have your own bucket, you probably want to give it a name that you want to maybe have it be a little bit more discoverable, or at least more obvious about what it represents. So for now, I'm just going to go with the default. Oh, same thing, sorry. This is the resource, and this is the bucket. In this case, I'm going to say I want auth users and guest users to access that bucket. And then you'll see a few of the questions that the CLI asks will have these little check boxes next to them. For those, you just press space, and it'll select those features. So I'm going to select create, read, and delete. And then the same thing for guest users. And then in this case, for example, this might be something interesting to whoever was asking about serverless. For example, for storage, you could have a Lambda trigger anytime somebody uploads an S3 file. In this case, I'm just going to go with no, just to keep things simple. So now that I've completed all these, completed this interactive questions and answers from the tool, I now need to basically tell Amplify, okay, I'm ready to go. And it tells me that I can either do Amplify push and Amplify publish. And so I'm going to go ahead and run Amplify push. And what this does is it actually goes and sets up everything that will live on the AWS side, on the server side, that has to do with provisioning any resources like the S3 bucket, like the Cognito user pool, and any permissions that have to go in between the two. And so you don't have to worry about any of these permissions. I, as a developer in the past, have had some trouble sometimes remembering, for example, which IAM policies to attach to certain things, but Amplify makes it simple for you, and you can later go and learn what the right answer is. So I'm going to press enter here, but I'm not going to make you wait because this can take a little while. But I'm going to answer yes, and you'll notice that it starts basically deploying your stack. As it does this, it does the equivalent of what you may have also heard about when people talk about CDK or CloudFormation. So it's very similar to that. It basically grabs the configuration, all the things that you answered, and then it basically goes and reserves these resources on the AWS side. So I'm not going to make you sit through this this provisioning. It doesn't take that long, but I'm going to make the demo. I'm going to keep going. So I have a separate project here that is basically just a very simple Swift UI application. And so in my application, what I did is I added a delegate class. So first, let me go into the application struct. And so I basically set up a UI application delegate adapter, and I told it that its type is this class that I called delegate. And so then here in my delegate class, I created a method called start amplify. Nothing fancy. And in this case, because I had reserved cognito or authentication and S3 resources or features, I add them to Amplify as a plugin. And so this basically lets you kind of forget about what concrete classes or what concrete services you're talking about, right? So we know that it's cognito, we know that it's S3, but once we start interacting with Amplify, you'll notice that we don't necessarily talk about those things. We just say Amplify storage or Amplify authentication, and things just work. So that if you ever need to inject, for the sake of testing, some other implementation, you can do that, right? So if you had a unit test that depends on storage, or sorry, if you had a class and you have a unit test for that class that depends on storage, you can just depend on the amplify.storage protocol, and you don't have to necessarily depend directly on the concrete class. And so then you just call configure, and then that configure call would basically go and read those two JSON files that I mentioned earlier. When the tool runs, you'll also notice that it actually makes a modification, a minor alteration to your Xcode project, and it references those two files that I talked about earlier. So those two JSON files are located right here on my left-hand side. And when you call configure without any parameters, it'll default to looking for those files and try to figure out what it is that you have configured, or what it is you have provisioned on the server. And so that's basically what the bootstrapping involves. So there's really nothing to it. You just sort of give it which plugins or which features you're using, you call configure, and it's ready to go. Now, obviously, nothing interesting happens here. So let's go straight into the application. Let's go ahead and run it, and I'll show you the UI. And before I do anything else, I'll kind of explain what it does. Again, nothing terribly fancy here. Just a username and password field at the top with 3 buttons, one of them called sign up, one of them called sign in, and one of them called sign out. And so these buttons do exactly what you imagine, and I'll show you the code in a second. And then at the bottom here, I added 2 more buttons, one of them labeled upload and one of them labeled download, just to exercise the things that we talked about. And so let's actually look into the login username and password interface, or the code for the interface, and you'll be hopefully pleased with how simple it is. So as you can see here, it's basically just an auth view, a Swift UI view that I called auth view, and it has it depends on this thing I call the auth view model. It is basically just a form with a text field that represents the email, a secure field with password, and these basically bind to these properties, the email and password properties in my model. And then I just have a little conditional here so that if anything goes wrong, I can basically see what Amplify is telling me went wrong. And then the 3 buttons that you saw earlier, sign up, sign in, and sign out, with their corresponding bindings to these functions that you see on the right-hand side. And so let's actually look at the code. So this code I've written beforehand, so I'm just going to talk through it. There's nothing fancy here, but I'll actually code the storage pieces. So when you sign up, it's, again, there's in this particular case, I'm calling amplify.auth.signup. If you were to want to basically decouple your code from like a static call to a function, you could grab a reference to this auth object and depend on that instead. And so you could basically have a variable in your class that is of type of auth. It's called auth category. and depend on that so that you don't necessarily have like this tight coupling with the class. And then you just call sign up. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm calling sign up with the username being the email. And right now I just have an email hard coded to some user 1234. The password is basically whatever value is set in this variable. And then in my particular case, because of how I configured the authentication feature, I'm passing in attributes so that it is able to communicate with the user, for example, for things like resetting your password or activating your account, which by default is turned on. So if your user were to sign up to your app and you have all the default settings, what will happen is that they will get an email. They will have to click on that email link to confirm their email ownership, basically. And at that point, they can then sign in. And so the sign in, again, it's very much what you would probably imagine. You call amplify.auth, that's sign in with the email and password. And if it were to fail, it would throw an exception. So it's worth pointing out that we're using the relatively recent APIs that Apple added to the Swift language, which are async await. And so you can basically have the login happen, or the login call happen, and you can either wait for it or go do something else and then check back later to see what the result was. But in this case, I'm just waiting for the call to finish. Once I'm signed in, I just print out a little message called that just reads signed in. And then lastly, sign out is the same way. You just call amplify.auth sign out, and you're done. You do have to wait for it just to make sure that it has released all the resources and potentially cleared the relevant parts of the keychain and things like that. But you don't have to worry about that. You can either await and then check back later, or wait for the call to finish. So now let's actually look at the storage. So storage, I didn't implement. I left it blank for the sake of the demo. And so let me show you how easy it would be to actually upload a file. So in this case, I'm just going to generate a file on the fly. Nothing from an external, nothing external into the application. I'm just going to generate a piece of data. So I'm going to say new data. And I'm going to generate this new data based on a UUID. And I'm going to just convert it to a string. And it's UTF-8 representation. So that is the data that I want to upload. And the way that I do it, oh, sorry, I typed data. And then what I need to do is I call amplify.storage.upload. And you'll see that there's basically two functions for this particular piece of functionality. In my case, because the data is in memory, I'm going to call the upload data function, but you could have a larger file and call upload file instead. In this case, I'm just going to say my key and upload the data that I just created. And for this, I will get back a task. And so in this particular case, this task, not all APIs, not all Amplify APIs are the same, but in this particular case, you get a task back so that if you did want to show progress, right, like uploading progress percentage-wise or something like that, you could do that. Or if you just want to wait, you could say task.result or task.value, I believe, and wait for that. So that's what I'm going to do here. Try await task value. And so, oops, try await task value. And so that's basically all I need to do to upload a file. So let's take that for a spin. Oops, my apologies. I need to catch this. 1 second to catch. For now, I'm just going to print the error. I don't expect there to be an error, but it's always good to to make sure that you catch it, you do something at least marginally useful here. So let's do that. And so you'll notice that the UI didn't change. There's nothing different here. I'm going to put a breakpoint in the task, and I'm going to press the upload button. And you'll see that it actually does, in fact, break on that. And then I'm going to press continue. And as you'll see, as you can see, it completed without any errors. And that's basically it. Super easy. I never had to figure, and you had to like give it which bucket to use or how to create a pre-signed URL or anything like that. Now, if I did want to do any of that, you always have the ability to basically say, hey, storage, give me the escape hatch. Oh, sorry. In this particular case, you need to ask for the plugin. You know what? Instead of doing that, let me go into where I instantiated the plugin. But if you ever needed to do anything more advanced, you could go into the plugin and ask the plugin to give it its escape hatch. I think Harshita might have mentioned this plugin. And so in this particular case, you could say, hey, plugin, get escape hatch. And here, the object that you get back is, in fact, an S3 client reference. So you can do more advanced things, like, again, like I mentioned, create pre-signed URLs and things like that. But I don't need to do that at the moment.
Stop you for a second, just because there were some questions in the chat that I want to make sure that we get
yes.
through. Okay, so one of them was specific to Amplify about how do you think about QA and prod environments in Amplify? Is that something is there like a module in Amplify for that?
Yes. So when you're filling out the information about AWS or Amplify init, it'll ask you which environment you're working on. And there's also some interesting things that you'll see in the CLI documentation. But one of the things that you can do, for example, if you were working on a team with multiple people and you had created resources for the dev environment, right? So it's a little less restricted, and it's more for collaboration between members of the team. You could do something like, okay, I'm going to set up my Amplify application, and then another developer can then type something like Amplify poll, and if they're connected to the same account, then they could basically pull the same dev environment for this Amplify application. When you then go and actually make it a production application, then you would basically be pulling the production configuration. And so just to address the last bit that I seem to remember from the question was, is it a separate EC2 or is a separate instance or something like that?
Yeah, Johan wrote, is it a EC2 virtual machine or a container? That was in that question.
It is, in this particular case, neither one of those things. You don't have a EC2 instance for the features that I created, but it does create something that you could think of as conceptually equivalent to a container. And so when you do the Amplify push that you saw finish here, it actually creates all the resources as a CloudFormation stack. And so you can think of the stack kind of conceptually equivalent to like a Docker image. So it has all the things that you need, and you could always replicate that stack and transfer it over to a different environment or a different account if needed. Hopefully that answers your question. But there's no EC2 instances in this particular setup. Not actually. I don't believe that any of the resources for iOS will instantiate an EC2 instance. For web, it might be a different story for hosting, but you don't get to. My understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that you don't get direct access to any instances. It is in that regard, it is somewhat serverless.
Okay. So this question I'll pose to Yeah, you, JC, and Sam. So there was questions around really security with Amplify. So JC, to start with you, are there any specific security, like native security configurations, modules that startups can be able to use in the Amplify library?
I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating the question? I
Yeah,
think
like, is there
I
anything
hung.
within the Amplify library that's specific to securing an app? Or is that, or like, do they need to then be able to actually go in and, I mean, yes, I saw there's IAM, that technically is security, but let's say, do they need to go in and let's say use AWS WAF for a firewall, or be able to use Security Hub
Or
and
VPC.
outside of, yeah, the, or such like that?
So Amplify doesn't expose any of that to the user. I will say there are some things that are that have some security baked into them. For example, the storage example that I was showing you, you can specify, for example, that the file that you're uploading can only be visible by the user that is currently logged in. And so not even if it's another user logged into the same account, they will not be able to see it. But in terms of the resources, it all kind of gets configured automatically for the user. The application itself, the security around the application itself, like I guess checking for external user input and things like that, is basically left up to the developer. I think the biggest, maybe the biggest concerns or the biggest kind of questions that users could have are things related to the authentication bits, or like I mentioned, securing the data. But in most cases, that data is often bound to the user that is logged in, and by default, it is done that way. If you need to sort of expose things to a wider audience, you programmatically would have to say so. For example, if I wanted to say this file that I'm about to upload is visible by other authenticated users, but not like anonymous users, then you can specify an option that indicates that. And there's equivalent things for other categories like data store, but in general, the default tends to be the more restrictive permission. Does
I would
that
also
answer
like
the
to,
question?
yeah, I mean, I also want to add that at Amplify, security is a very core part of our design process as well. We go through many reviews internally to make sure that we are gaining our developers' trust by providing a very strong security posture around our service, our features. And to your question, Jillian, we can also add developers can also add other services like WAF support on top of what we already offer in order to further restrict traffic to their website or their app. So that is something that they can do on top of that. And yeah, so it's something that we take very seriously, and we want developers, because with technology evolving so much, it's very important for developers to make sure that their users are safe and gain their trust. So we try to do a lot of heavy lifting there for developers.
Yeah, we are getting close to time, which so I want to make sure that every person here really can give an opportunity, because you all have different perspectives, of some parting advice for everyone. So Sam, I want to start with you because I want to get your experience. So you work with startups of all different stages of their startup journey. What advice do you have for startups who now are starting to build a mobile app, an MVP in AWS?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think a lot of what we've talked about today is kind of built into that. And I think, Harshita mentioned, really have that focus on what you want to build, focus on who the users are going to be, and then think about, once you have that idea and you have all of that, think about how many users they're going to be. Think about what your budget is. Think about, do you want, disaster recovery? Do you want high availability, all these different things, right? And how you're going to think about that, and where your application is going to be, and how fast you want that application to go to market, right? All these kinds of different requirements. make sure that you have those written down, you have those set, and then you can kind of get going. And you can, once you have all those requirements, you can work much faster because you already know those types of things. So I definitely think having that preparation work is key to building an application.
I love that. Even something, yes, maybe disaster recovery. Some of the people here might be like, "Hey, I'm like a 2-person startup. I mean, I just got my first customer," but it still helps. I think it's never too early, right, to really start thinking and planning.
Exactly.
Harshita, what about you? Any advice? And it could be on both sides. It could be for startups who are building an MVP of a mobile app, or maybe for there's probably people here who they're the CEO, the CTO, and they're like, oh my God, I've never had to be like a product manager where I have to start thinking about the roadmap and what are the features that customers want. So what advice from that lens would you give to people?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks who are in this industry and at that stage of development will struggle with this sort of analysis paralysis where there are way too many things and you don't know where to start. So I think that the most important thing is to remember what your differentiating solution is, what is going to really attract your users to use your product, and focus on that. The rest, try to make it simpler by using maybe services like Amplify for your front end development, right? And I think that using other solutions to help simplify other parts of your app will really help you spend that extra time on what is truly core to your solution that you want to provide to your users. So yeah, I think that would be my small advice to go forward with your app development.
And JC, what advice do you have? Especially there's probably people who are the CTO, but they're also the developer too, on top of other roles that they're building at being at this company.
Yeah, so one piece of advice I would give folks is to just keep their customer in mind. Don't lose the inspiration. I think tools like Amplify kind of help in that regard. And then the other thing about Amplify is that sees the opportunity that it might give you if you are not necessarily familiar with backend resources. Kind of go and inspect what Amplify is actually making for you, so that you can also kind of learn how that translates, right, from a high level to, okay, this is how the infrastructure was set up. That's another tip that I would love to give folks.
I love it. Harshita, Sam, JC, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. You definitely want to stick around because I know we were talking a little about security, but the next segment on AWS On Air is actually going to be about security, and that happens at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. UTC time. So that's going to be on CloudFront Security at Edge with WAF. So you definitely want to check that out. But this show happens every single Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UTC. Next week, we're going to be talking about what are the things from an AWS perspective you should be doing before you launch your startup in AWS, you launch your startup to the world. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about customer acquisition tactics. Sorry? Oh, I totally thought I heard something. But anyway, so so we're going to be here every single week, but stick around for the next one on security. Thank you so much, everyone. Can't wait to see you all next week.
And thank you so much, Jillian, for hosting today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks, Jillian.